Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to sing a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild. Is your credit in bad shape? Do you need a new car? Ready to buy a new house? You want to rent an apartment? Are you going to apply for a job? Any one of these activities are going to ask for a credit report and then check out your credit score. Let Dynamic Solutions 2 erase your negative credit remarks. You go to www.dynamicsolutions2, that's the number 2.com, or call 424-888-2820. Now, if you enter promo code ED or you mention Ed Opperman, you get a 10% discount. How's that? You get a free consultation, all negative items removed, get back in positive credit position. Dynamic Solutions 2, life-changing dynamic financial solutions.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We got a big one for you today. We got Craig Unger. Have you seen this guy on all the talk shows, all the cable news shows? You might remember his book, House of Bush, House of Sword. Okay, but he got a new one out right now, House of Trump, House of Putin. And he's right on the cutting edge of all this stuff, the Russian connections with Mr. Trump there. Craig Unger, are you there?
Yes, I am. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Craig Unger?
Well, I've been in journalism for more than 45 years, actually. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and right after college, I went to Harvard. But right out of college, I went into journalism. And I've been doing it ever since. And I've really done. You mentioned House of Bush, House of Sound, but my last 4 books have been really on what I think of as the Republican Party's war against democracy. And most recently, of course, that's in, I take that on in House of Trump, House of Putin.
Okay, he's a little humble there. Editor of editor of Variety and a Boston magazine. This guy's been around. He's done a New York magazine. Forget it, okay? The New Yorker.
I've been at Vanity Fair for 15 years as a contributing editor. I wrote for most of the major magazines. And actually, if you saw the documentary Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore, I was in that. And more recently, I'm in the current documentary, Active Measures, which takes on the same subject I address in my book, House of Trump, House of Putin.
Yeah, and you said it's playing right now in New York and L.A. It's out already?
Right, and people can stream it on Hulu or Amazon or iTunes.
Okay, sit down. Let's have an overview here. House of Trump, House of Putin. How deep does this go?
I think this is even more serious than most people. The United States was attacked on Pearl Harbor, and that got us into World War II. We were attacked on 9/11, and I live just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center today. Because that was in my neighborhood. And we were also attacked on 11/9, that is November 9th, 2016, during the presidential election. And to me, this was the biggest attack of all because the Russians succeeded in putting a Russian asset in the White House without firing a single shot. I think this is really the greatest intelligence operation of our times. I mean, it's just incredibly successful. This is, I titled the first chapter, Virtual World War III. And by that I mean that this is a global conflict. Russia is fighting back. They lost the Cold War, and one by one, all the East Bloc nations went into NATO. And Vladimir Putin decided he wanted to fight back, but it's a different kind of war. It's a war without bombs or bullets or boots on the ground. It's a hybrid warfare using cyber warfare, using hacking, using disinformation. And in this case, one really unusual weapon in Putin's arsenal is the Russian Mafia, and that's what I'm focusing on. And I see this as an intelligence operation that was more than 30 years in the making, that goes back easily to the 1980s when they first targeted Donald Trump and they began to compromise him.
Well, then give us an idea. What is the history between Trump and the Russian mob and the Russian government?
Well, it's really long and tangled, and one of the first episodes took place in 1984 when Trump had just built Trump Tower, and it was the glitziest building in New York. I mean, in the country, really. It was celebrated all over the world. New York had been through a rough time, and now it was coming back, and he became this celebrity real estate developer. And a man, just after it opened, a man named David Fogadin, met privately with Trump in Trump Tower, and he put down $6 million in cash. That's the equivalent of about $15 million today, and bought 5 condos. And according to the state attorney general's office in New York, that was an act of money laundering. And I believe it went on, it happened hundreds of times, even thousands of times, and that Donald Trump laundered money again and again for the Russian Mafia, well over $1 billion.
So there's actual litigation that names Trump involved in money laundering?
Well, David, Trump was, let me be clear, Trump was not prosecuted for this. Right. And it's impossible for me to get inside his head and what he knew and what he doesn't know. There is a legal concept known as willful blindness or willful ignorance. And I believe a good prosecutor could make a very, very strong case that is precisely what Trump has been doing. Is he doesn't ask any questions. He loves dealing with gangsters because they will pay top dollar. They're getting their money laundered. And Trump gets high prices for his condo, so he's perfectly happy. And I know that this has happened. There was a BuzzFeed investigation that showed that these kind of transactions happened to at least 1,300 Trump luxury condos in the United States alone. So right there, if you figure $1 million is a very low-ball price for a Trump condo, that's over $1 billion right there. And that does not include his vast collection of properties overseas.
Oh my God, I had no idea it was that deep.
Well, this was a cathedral of money laundering, what Trump Tower was, but it also became a model for him. That is, if you flash forward to the 90s, Trump had expanded into Atlantic City. He really overexpanded with three huge casinos that were competing against each other and going broke. And he emerged from that $4 billion in debt. Trump had 6 bankruptcies. He couldn't get a bank loan from anywhere, and he was completely out of business. And if you want to know how he came back to life professionally, how he made his comeback, he owes it all to the Russian Mafia. They sort of bought and owned him.
And that is through Bayrock and Felix Sater?
That's certainly a big part of it, absolutely. In 2002, a company called Bayrock opened for business, and they were located in Trump Tower, that is where Trump lives and where he works. They were on the 24th floor, and that's an important floor if you know the building, because everyone in the higher floors have to switch elevators there, which means they had easy access to Donald Trump, who was just up 1 or 2 flights where his office was. So they ran into him regularly, and they went to him and they sort of made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Trump, again, couldn't get a bank loan almost anywhere, and they said, well, we'll put up all the money. You don't have to put up a dime. In exchange, we just want to license your name, and we will give you 18 to 25% royalties on all the condos we sell. So that's how he got back on his feet and began his comeback. And he never could have run for president if he was $4 billion in debt. They made him whole again, but in doing so, they owned him effectively.
And what time period was that? Did this go on?
Well, Bayrock opened its. I believe they opened in 2002, and he worked with them on and off for, I don't know, roughly 8 years or so. What's going on here is really, there's one point I really want to get across, and I think a lot of Americans don't quite understand, and that's because when we think of the mafia, we think Americans tend to think about John Gotti or Al Capone or the Sopranos or the Godfather or whatever, the Italian-American mafia. The Russian mafia is quite different. And I realized when I first explained this to someone, they didn't quite understand it. And I said that Vladimir Putin's greatest triumph was that he weaponized the Russian mafia. He uses it as a weapon in his arsenal. And when I say this is a new kind of warfare, I mean they're using cyber warfare. They're manipulating the media. They're manipulating financial markets. But they're also using the Russian mafia, which reports to Putin. When people talk about Russia as a mafia state, and it's not just a metaphor, really, it's quite literal. Vladimir Putin is the top dog, and he's the capo in the Russian mafia. So I focus on a man named Semyon Mogilevich. It's a hard name to pronounce, I know, but I think he's hugely, hugely important. If you go back to 9/11, a lot of people have never heard of Osama bin Laden, and that was a very unfamiliar name. Well, I think Mogilevich is equally important, and he's met with Putin several times. I document that in my book. And he makes agreements with them. And as a result, Mogilevich is able to siphon off a huge amount of money, nearly $1 billion a year, from the Russian energy trade to Ukraine. And in siphoning that off, he shares it with Putin. Everyone gets rich. And this was one of the money pipelines that was used to funnel money into the Trump organization.
Is this the Rosneft deal?
No, this is not the Rosneft deal. There are a lot of money pipelines, and it's easy to get them confused. I try to focus just on a couple of them to give you an idea of how it works. And essentially, Russia and Turkmenistan have enormous amounts of liquid natural gas. Ukraine has absolutely zero, and it is cold there, and they are 100% dependent on Putin for getting their liquid natural gas. So the mafia has insinuated itself as a really unnecessary intermediary, and they just siphon off about $1 billion a year from that trade. And they want to keep those kind of arrangements going. They're getting filthy rich off of them. And that means they need to have political power in Ukraine. And how are they going to get it? Well, they needed a savvy political consultant, so they hired Paul Manafort, who, of course, became Trump's campaign manager later on, and he installed a Putin puppet as president of Ukraine, a guy named Viktor Yanukovych, and I believe he sort of replicated that 10 years later in 2016, installing another Putin puppet as president, namely Donald Trump as president of the United States.
That reminds me, now I had heard that Giuliani's law firm took over a lot of those contracts that Manafort was handling. Have you looked into that?
Well, I haven't really, but Giuliani's, he's gone kind of become a loose cannon lately, and it seems like he's almost senile. But he definitely had friends who were tied up in this, and he did get money from a guy named Semyon Kislin, who was tied in with all these Russian mobsters. And he appointed Kislin as head of his Economic Development Council back when he was mayor of New York in the 90s.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Putin and Malevolence, right? These are some of the richest men in the world, right?
Yeah.
And
Putin has, by some accounts, as much as $200 billion. And I think it's worth saying that when you get into this world, you realize you're entering a world of just unimaginable greed. And there was a episode I recounted in my book where there was a party off the coast of Turkey, and one 300-foot yacht cruises in, a 400-foot yacht cruises in, a 500-foot yacht cruises in. One of them actually had bar stools, 29 bar stools, each of which was upholstered in the hide of a different endangered species. And down in the galley of these yachts, the staffers are negotiating to bring underage girls in as escorts for these billionaires. It's just quite extraordinary what goes on in this world, and to me, it's just I realized that it gone through the looking glass and entered this world of unfathomable greed.
I believe I heard that story, that they made an arrest. It wasn't an arrest made, that there was a prostitution ring going on these yachts off the...
Well, they were absolutely busted, and they were acquitted. I should say that, but you have to wonder. I was able to obtain court documents, including wiretap transcripts of what was actually going on those boats, and you can hear them negotiating. And is it worth paying an extra 50% premium for a virginal 16-year-old girl? So all of that kind of stuff really does appear to have been going on.
Is that in the book? Do you have those documents in the book?
Yes, it is. I print those books, and they're documented. Everything is footnoted. And if you want to check up on me, you can click on the footnotes, which have the URL, and go straight to the court documents.
I salute you for that, because that seems to be a taboo topic that nobody wants to discuss, on these cable news shows.
Well, it is pretty dicey, and you have to be very careful what you say legally. They were acquitted, I do have to say that, but I mean, readers can read the court documents for themselves. These were the wiretap transcripts of what was actually going on.
Yeah, I think that the fact that they were acquitted when you have wiretap transcripts is even more damning, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. This is a world of oligarchs who wield enormous political power. And if you look at the former Soviet states that are involved in this, it's really a tightly knit crowd. The Russian Mafia is enormously powerful. I was also able to obtain some documents from Ukrainian intelligence. Again, these are transcripts of wiretaps, but in which you can see that the head of Ukrainian intelligence is talking about meetings between Vladimir Putin and Simeon Mogilevich, the powerful Russian mobster. So this is how it works, and we've seen how it works in Russia, and it's pretty horrifying. You end up with a few hundred spectacularly rich people, multi-billionaires, people with 10 and $20 billion, and they control all the natural resources in Russia. And now, what appears to be the case is Donald Trump saw how Vladimir Putin works. He sees Putin as effectively president for life, and he's worth, by some accounts, $200 billion. That sounds pretty good to Donald Trump, and he's trying to do the same thing here.
That was actually going to be my next question. Yeah, a guy like Trump, wouldn't he see that and say, hey, that's the goal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the Trump family has a long history with organized crime. Trump's grandfather had a brothel back in the days of the San Francisco gold on the West Coast after the gold rush. Really, his father was a real estate developer in Queens here in New York, and he had a lot of dealings and with the mafia, with the Italian American mafia, and even partnered with one of them. When you get to when Trump himself started out, his very first operations involved working with the Russian Mafia, and his lawyer, Roy Cohn, who was sort of the dark, satanic prince of the McCarthy era, Roy Cohn represented the two of the five big Italian mafia families here in New York, and it helped Trump enormously when he was getting a start in real estate by giving him special deals with various contractors.
Yeah, what do you think? Do you think Roy Cohn would be rolling over in his grave hearing the name Trump in Russia? You know what I mean?
You know what? I think Roy Cohn would be chortling with joy. I think he's thrilled. I mean, he's been dead since 1986, and he cast a very, very long shadow. I know younger listeners probably have never heard of him, but he was really this really dark, satanic presence who was a ferocious bully. Once I was at New York Magazine as an editor about 35 years ago, and Roy Cohn called me up and yelled at me and tried to get me to kill a story and said he would sue me and destroy me and made all sorts of threats, which he never followed through on, thankfully. But he was a brute. He represented both major establishment figures like Rupert Murdoch and the Reagans and so forth, but he also represented mobsters as well.
I actually once I set out to do a story on Roy Cohn, and I wound up doing a story about John Holmes, the porn star, because John Holmes used to hang out with Roy Cohn. So,
I did not know that, but not too long ago, I mean, Trump was bellowing about Robert Mueller, the special counselor, in the investigation, and he yelled out, "Where's my Roy Cohn? Where's my Roy Cohn?" And that's what he wants in a lawyer. He wants a thuggish fixer, someone who will just fix things by bullying and bullying and bullying. And I think at Robert Mueller, Trump may have met his match.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Okay, let's take a little commercial break here. Excellent information here with Craig Unger. The book is House of Trump, House of Putin. And we'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors.
Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Maybe the facility you manage could establish new revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Cart King International can be the answer to your needs. Cart King is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile coffee, food, and retail carts and kiosks. Cart King has been working with clients and corporations across North America for 20 years, providing innovative designs, custom manufacturing, and timely delivery. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on our website. Please visit us today at www.cart-king.com or just call us at 1-877-986-7771 and get your sales rolling.
PureSoapFlakes.com, 218-568-2525. Have you ever heard of Castile Soap? Pure Soap Flake Company handcrafts fine soap bars, laundry powder, and concentrated soap flakes using organic vegetable oils from their northern Minnesota facility. Bathe your body and wash your clothes with pure soap products that are free of fragrance, GMOs, palm oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, and synthetic additives. Keep it clean, folks. Pure Soap Flake Company products are kind to living creatures and sensitive skin, safe for drains and waterways, and work great in high-efficiency washers and top and front-loading machines. They have a little promotion going on. Contact them to order some soap. Mention the Opperman Report. You're going to get a free gift. They're going to send a little extra soap, travel size, soap bars, and laundry soap, cleaning soap flakes. I've been using that stuff all day long today. Great stuff. Order today at puresoapflakes.com or give them a call, 218-568-2525, 218-568-2525. Pure Soap Flake Company is a proud member of the Handcrafted Soap and Cosmetic Guild.
Tina Helmuth is writing an ongoing series of fact-fiction books that boldly takes on today's most heinous crimes. Suffer the Little Children, The Wrath of the Father, and Unbreakable. Deeply researched and mixed with the supernatural, good versus evil makes these thrillers hard to put down. Available at Lulu.com in paperback or ebook.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Craig Unger, author of the book House of Trump, House of Putin. So now, if I were to do my best Hannity impersonation, right, and I would start to
give it a try.
Well, I can't. Well, I'd have to hit myself in the head with a hammer. But or the entire right-wing alt media, alt radio right-wing, and go into about the dodgy dossier and the discredited dossier, the Steele dossier. Have you found anything in there that's actually been discredited?
No, I have not. In fact, one of the first people I interviewed had worked with Christopher Steele a lot, and he had been in the Clinton administration. He was in charge of fighting money laundering, and he had hired Christopher Steele many, many times, over 100 times. And I asked him what he was like to work with, and he said, well, I wouldn't have hired him 100 times unless he was really, really good. And when you think about it, hundreds of reporters have been looking at the Steele dossier. And Steele, I believe, we should all have such wonderful reputations. He is clean as a whistle as far as I can see. He went to Cambridge University, very, very, very well educated. He had been in Moscow with MI6. So when he was hired to investigate this, he already had a big, big track record. I mean, he was well informed. He spoke Russian, had been there in Moscow for many years. And he had actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Alexander Litvinenko, who had been with the Russian FSB and was out to expose Vladimir Putin for all his ties to the Russian Mafia, among other things, who went, and then he finally found asylum in London and was poisoned by Putin's operatives and died of polonium, radioactive polonium poisoning. Well, Christopher Steele investigated that murder as well. So he had a really good background when he started this, and I don't think anything has been completely discredited. There's some stuff that's very, very hard to corroborate, but I did find some evidence. Actually, to me, what was the most outlandish allegation in the Steele dossier had nothing to do with sex. It had to do with it alleged that Donald Trump was funneling intelligence to Russia, to the Kremlin, to Putin. And I thought that was ridiculous when I first read it because, I mean, a spy has to be disciplined, he has to be discreet, and Donald Trump ain't none of those things. And I thought, how could that possibly be true? But in fact, I really did find corroboration for it. And, you know, I said earlier how the Russian Mafia has ties to Russian intelligence, and that is the key, because I want to unpack that for just a minute, that all these Russian mobsters who were living in Trump Tower, who were working out of Trump Tower, who were buying and selling condos and laundering money out of Trump Tower and other Trump-branded properties, they were actually located in there, and they were closely tied to Russian intelligence. So when you unpack the kind of information that Bayrock must have had, well, they had raised hundreds of millions, maybe even a couple of billions of dollars to create Trump Towers all over the world. Then where did that money come from? Well, some of it came from Russian mobsters and went through the FL Group, which was an Icelandic bank known to launder money for the Russian Mafia. So some of the money came that way. In addition, all the condos, many of the condos were sold to Russians all over the world. They would have those records as well. So that is kind of information that would be very important to Vladimir Putin. He wants to keep a track on his oligarchs and how they're spending money. They are crucial to him maintaining power. And this is the kind of information that easily could have flowed from Trump Tower to Vladimir Putin.
Fascinating. What about the Trump kids? Any connections between them and their own private Russian dealings?
Well, there's a lot there. I have to say, the one who doesn't come up much is Eric, who's the younger, not the youngest son. But even he did at one point explain when he was asked how Trump, this is after the 2008 fiscal crisis, Trump started building all these golf courses all over the world. And someone was saying, how can you get money for that? No one's financing golf courses. And Eric said, oh, it came from the Russians. And it's interesting to look at the change in Trump's business practices then, because early on in his career, Trump loved debt. He would finance everything. He'd go deeply into debt. And as said earlier, he ended up $4 billion in debt in Atlantic City, bankrupt and unable to repay it. But suddenly, after the Russians came back into his life, he loved cash, and it was cash he was getting from the Russians. So Eric was referring to that. And Don Jr., of course, has spoken out about that as well. And Don Jr. and Ivanka went to Moscow with Felix Sater, who was part of Bayrock. So they were involved into this to some extent. We also know about Donald Jr.'s involvement in the famous June meeting in 2016 at Trump Tower, which appears, I think, to be an out-and-out case of collusion.
Yeah, right. How can people make the argument that, well, nothing came out of it? You know what I mean? It's like, if I try and shake you down for money and I don't get any, I'm still guilty of extortion.
Not only that, I mean, think about what the Russians have learned from that. Well, you have an email from Rob Goldstone to Donald Jr. saying that we've got dirt on Hillary Clinton, and this is coming from the Russian government, and we'd like to share it with you. Well, 17 minutes later, exactly 17 minutes later, Donald Trump Jr. emails back, I love it. Right. I look forward to getting it. So what an easy mark is he? I mean, even if nothing happens from then on, the Russians have learned this is a guy who doesn't think about security for an instant. He's willing to take help from a hostile foreign government without thinking about it. So they know he is a soft spot if they want to penetrate Trump's inner circle.
It made me think, too, and I'm a little scattered all over the place, but Roger Stone just recently admitted, too, that he did have that meeting with that Russian character who wanted $2 million for the emails. Did you touch on any of that?
Well, I've interviewed Roger a couple of times, going way back, and he's always an interesting character, and I would not be surprised at all if he were indicted. I don't go into that specifically, but you can see, it's worth looking at Roger Stone and Paul Manafort, and the way Trump deals with them is he always minimizes his relationship with them.
Right.
And he said, oh, Paul Manafort, he just worked for me for a few weeks, and he barely did anything. Well, wait just a minute, okay? Hold on. In fact, Trump first worked with Manafort in 1980, 38 years ago. And Paul Manafort and Roger Stone had worked together in many different incarnations, but their lobbying shop on K Street was known as the torturer's lobby, the dictator's lobby. They took pride in taking millions of dollars from the most autocratic dictators in the world, and they did that again and again and again. And in 2006, Putin, actually, I just confused the two, and maybe they serve the same purpose, I guess. But Putin wanted to sustain the kind of relationships I mentioned earlier, where they could skim money off the Ukraine energy trade. And to do that, he wanted a man named Viktor Yanukovych, who was very much a Putin puppet, installed or elected, but really installed as president of Ukraine. And he needed some savvy political guidance from the West, so he hired Paul Manafort. And Manafort was making, when he started working in the Ukraine, he was making $10 million a year, which is not nothing. And he's he's completely doing the bidding of Vladimir Putin against American interests year after year after year. And I believe what he did in Ukraine with Yanukovych, Manafort replicated 10 years later in 2016 by installing another Putin puppet as president, namely Donald Trump.
And what kind of business was Trump and Manafort doing in the 80s?
Well, they were Manafort was helping Trump get licensing and various projects he was going on, and lobbying. They're in all these real estate developments, and also when you go into Atlantic City, you need to grease the wheels a bit, and Manafort is sort of a master at that. Okay.
Now back to Felix Sater. We've learned recently that he was childhood friends with Michael Cohen.
Yes, exactly. And again, this is Trump actually said this under oath. He said, well, Felix Sater, if he came in the room, I don't think I'd recognize him. Well, that's simply not true. Sater worked with Trump for many years, but as you said, he and Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, go back to the 1980s. And they knew each other in the Brooklyn area, in the Brighton Beach area of Brooklyn, which is sort of the home base for the Russian Mafia in the United States. And actually, Michael Cohen's family, his uncle and Michael Cohen himself, owned a restaurant, nightclub called El Carib, and that was the center of operations for the Russian Mafia. It's where they held their late-night meetings and so forth. And Cohen knew Felix Sater because he was dating a Ukrainian woman he later married, and Felix was friendly with her, and they had a good friendship that went on for many years, and they got together back in the aughts, I guess, around 2006 or so. By then, Felix was working with Donald Trump through Bayrock, and Michael Cohen came back in as Trump's attorney and sort of fixer. He was sort of a second-rate Roy Cohn, if you like. He wanted to just fix things, and as we've seen, he handled payoffs to various women with whom Trump allegedly had sexual entanglements, and would pay off Stormy Daniels or Karen McDougal or various other women who apparently needed to be paid off. Hush money, I think it's called.
As far as fixers go, he was like the Shemp of the Three Stooges.
Exactly. I didn't like that.
Yeah.
Actually, you know who he was? I think Bob Odenkirk of Better Call Saul. Do you know him?
Yeah.
He's sort of a low-rent lawyer who'll fix things. He's going to make it right.
But now, when I saw Felix Sater, he did those round of appearances. He claimed that he met Trump because he just knocked on his door at Trump Tower. That's impossible, right?
Well, remember, Bayrock was on the 24th floor of Trump Tower, and that's a very important floor. So he could he could just walk up a flight of stairs and knock on the door. But they were partnering with him, and he did talk to him several times a week. I think they were much closer than is let on. And in the book, I think there was a lot of unanswered questions about Felix Sater that remain, and that as I put it in House of Trump, we know Felix had at the very least had a double life. That is, he was convicted of felonies twice. A pump and dump stock scam, and he also got into a bar fight where he stabbed a guy in the face. It needed over 100 stitches. And then we know he flipped and became an FBI cooperator and started working for the FBI and the CIA and so forth. And he paints himself as this almost heroic figure for saving American lives as a result of his work with the FBI and CIA. What we don't know is, did he really have a triple life? And was he still secretly working for the Russian Mafia? That's what I want to find out in the future. And what I did find out, some of it, that he was flying back and forth to Russia, even just before the election, trying to make deals for Trump, for a Trump Tower in Moscow, which never happened. And he was dealing with people in the Russian Mafia there, with companies who were tied with Semyon Mogilevich, who was the powerful Russian mobster who was the brains behind the Russian Mafia.
Can you give us a little bit more background of what he was doing for the CIA and what kind of cases he was turning for the FBI?
Well, he claims, and I have not verified this, but he claims he was stalking al-Qaeda, that he came up with the coordinates for bin Laden's actual geographic location, his physical location, for some of his attempts to get bin Laden during the Clinton era. Whether or not that's the case, I don't really know if he's exaggerated that. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Whitey Bulger, who was a Boston mobster who cooperated with the FBI. And if you saw the movie The Departed, it's sort of based on that in part. And the thing was Whitey Bulger was a killer. And yes, he was cooperating with the FBI in Boston. He was part of the Irish Mafia. But while he was cooperating with them, they sort of allowed him to go ahead and murder more than a dozen Italian mobsters. So he was literally getting away with murder because of his cooperation. And I'm just raising the question was Felix doing the same thing? Because he was supposedly working for the FBI and the CIA, doing all this stuff, these acts of daring do, infiltrate, breaking up arms sales to al-Qaeda. But in the meantime, he was in Trump Tower, and they were laundering money with Donald Trump. And what happened? Why wasn't the FBI following that? Why were they allowing Donald Trump to launder money for the Russian Mafia? And I think that question has not been answered, and it needs to be answered before this whole investigation is over.
I recently saw in an article that Felix Sater, the FBI agent that was involved in the investigation against Sater, is now a bodyguard for Trump. You
got it. Absolutely right. There are so many things like this that raise so many questions. Why, is he? So it just you have to raise a question: is that how he's being paid off? If he's being paid by Donald Trump, he's not going to be talking. It's generally a rule of thumb I have. So it's one way to keep people quiet.
And Sater, Loretta Lynch wrote a letter of recommendation for his sentencing.
That is true, but you know what? I don't really know how seriously to take all that, because from the Justice Department's view, from the FBI's point of view, they're touting their achievements. And at the time, no one was thinking about Donald Trump. And so what might have just happened, I did talk to a former CIA official about this, and he said, don't take that too seriously. Her underlings had this operation. They think it makes them look good. She was repeating it in congressional testimony, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Felix was really delivering. And it could be as simple as that.
Do you think he's cooperating now?
He says he is. He's easy to talk to. I mean, every time I've talked to him, I call him, and he's sort of fun to talk to, and he's quite charming, and he's a barrel of laughs. And when he goes on the media, I think he charms. He's been on MSNBC a lot. I've noticed. I've seen him interviewed by Chris Hayes on MSNBC and George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and he is really adept at manipulating the media. But I don't think that really answers the questions that I just raised.
Yeah, he seems very confident. No fear of prosecution.
Yeah, no, he's got all the aspects of a great con man. I mean, he's delightful to talk to. He flatters you. He's fun to be with. He's a barrel of laughs. But that doesn't answer the questions. And I, whenever I've interviewed him, I can tell he's feeling me out to see how much I know, and he's going to give. He's going to gauge his answers accordingly, but he never really answers the questions. I mean, in the late after 2013, 2014, he was going back and forth to Moscow a lot. He was dealing with a couple of companies who were not well known in the United States. Companies like Sistema and Mirax. You're not going to find much if you Google them in English. But my assistant, I had a wonderful assistant who speaks Russian, and she would Google it in Cyrillic in Russian. And suddenly you'd see these companies are tied to some very shady characters who are part of the entourage of Semyon Mogilevich, again, the man who is the brains behind the Russian Mafia.
When you talk to Sater, do you get the impression he's reporting back to someone else?
I don't really know how to gauge that. What I did look at is how many ties he has to Russia, and there are many, many. So it would be very easy for them to get information back to the appropriate people in the Kremlin. I mean, part of it is there's through this Hasidic sect called Chabad that Felix is part of, and he's part of a synagogue in Long Island that is tied very close to the Grand Rabbi of Moscow, Beryl Azar. So that's one easy channel. There are other financiers. If you look at Bayrock's corporate promotional papers, they list half a dozen Russian oligarchs who are tied in with the Russian Mafia in one way or another, or who are close to Putin. So it would be very easy for them to get that information back to the Kremlin.
I recently heard that Felix Sater has a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein.
I did not know that. Now, that's interesting.
I'll send you the link.
Yes, I would love to. I mean, this adds up to repeated allegations. And of course, in the Steele dossier, there are all sorts of allegations about Trump's proclivities. Jeffrey Epstein, of course, was convicted, I believe, for sex with underage girls. I guess they were girls, not women. Yeah. And I have heard repeated allegations like this from different sources, but they tend to be different episodes. So I never really reported on them in any depth because I'd like to have two or more sources for them.
Gotcha. Okay. What do you think? We can. Everyone says again. I'll do my right wing advocacy, devil's advocate here.
I don't think Fox is going to hire you. But go ahead.
Everyone always says, "Well, we see all these convictions, these guilty pleas, and these deals, but there's nothing. There's no Russian collusion. Well, where is the Russian collusion? What do you think? What's coming?"
I'm glad you asked that. To me, it's staring us in plain sight. One is they own him. They own him. They own him. He would not be president without them. He was $4 billion in debt. Hello. If I got you out of $4 billion in debt and made you a multi-billionaire again, you'd owe me. So right there, there's something. Two is there's so many allegations of compromise, and I've talked to people about them. No, I don't have the definitive proof, but knowing what you know about Trump and these payoffs to all these women, I mean, it's just not at all hard to believe. But I also think what I try to do in my book is I try to give the big picture. And I think when people watch the news today, even people who are really following this rigorously, you get thrown one piece of the jigsaw puzzle at a time, and it's sort of interesting one at a time. But don't you want to put them all together and look at the whole picture? And when you look at the whole picture, you see that not only do they own him, they've compromised him in so many different ways. The money laundering, as I say, I can't tell you what's inside Donald Trump's brain when he was knowledgeable. And you kind of need that to make a case of money laundering. But the BuzzFeed investigation showed that these kinds of transactions, that is, all cash transactions, in which real estate is purchased, Trump real estate is purchased by anonymous shell companies. That is effectively the definition of money laundering, and that those kind of transactions happened with at least 1,300 Trump condos. Now, I think that's enough to say it's not random. It's not a coincidence. And that there's something going on here, that this defines a real relationship, and that these Russian mobsters who have ties to Russian intelligence, they have direct lines to Russian intelligence, and they are living in the home, they're running operations in the home of the President of the United States. Wow. That is something. That is compromised beyond belief. And Donald Trump took away the security clearance of John Brennan, who had been head of the CIA. Well, I would argue that how can Donald Trump get a security clearance? He's the biggest security risk, the biggest security breach in American history.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. And it's really a terrifying situation when you really lay this out.
It really is. And just one more thing. I mean, he says it in plain, everything is hiding in plain sight to me. At a campaign speech, he said, Russia, if you have 30,000 emails, send them over. I mean, you can go to YouTube and watch that any time you want. I don't have to dig up secret information. He is asking for their help, and they deliver the help. What more do you need?
Well, he's meeting with the Russians privately in the Oval Office with no cameras.
Absolutely. And it's petrifying and scary. And I try to put this in a larger geopolitical framework. And one thing I think people tend to forget is the Western alliance. Most of us are too young to really appreciate it. But if you look at Europe before 1945 and afterwards. Before 1945, you had two horrifying world wars. Tens of millions of people were killed, the Holocaust and more. After 1945, we promoted democratic institutions and market economies. Both of them worked, and we ended up with great allies, great trading partners, and military allies, and that's lasted for over 70 years. Well, Donald Trump wants to destroy that. Vladimir Putin wants to destroy that. And Putin is using Trump to do that. If you saw the events of Helsinki, or even Trump is breaking with Europe all the time. Europe is not our enemy, and he shouldn't be doing that. And I think it's been a huge victory for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I'm originally from New York. I've been watching Trump for years. He's always pushed the envelope, and I predicted too during the primary that he's going to wind up in prison. That he can't stand the scrutiny of his life, this life of Trump. Now he sees president for life. He sees Putin, and he says, I want to do that." Do you think he can pull that off?
No, I don't. I think you're right. But if I had to bet, I'd bet with you. But it seems to me we're on a train wreck either way. It's a collision course, and there are only two possibilities. One is that he'll be forced out, and if the rule of law prevails, that will happen. The Democrats will have to win the midterms and go right to impeachment, and then Mueller revelations will come, and there'll be impeachment hearings and so forth, and it will be an incredible zoo, even more so than now. Or Trump is going to do something so horrifying, I don't want to speculate, but it will be outside the rule of law, and whether it's starting an unnecessary war or whatever, I would not put it past him. But I think in the end, you're going to it's going to go in one of those two directions.
Now, I know you're very careful with your reporting, but is there anything we should have an eye out for, the next shoe to drop that you're aware of that's
Well, I would look for something around Roger Stone to happen. It wouldn't surprise me in the next couple of weeks. I think one of the really interesting things, too, is Manafort. Manafort has been found guilty. He's entitled, he can still make a deal with Mueller. And if he flips, wow, because think of it this way. Nixon went down when John Dean, his lawyer, flipped against him. Trump has already had his White House counsel, Don McGahn, has spent 30 hours before Mueller. His personal lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, is flipping, and he knows an awful lot and has hundreds of hours of tape recording. You have George Papadopoulos, who's flipped. You have there's so many I can't keep in my head at once, but I think there's 7 people who flipped. And if Paul Manafort joins the club, wow, Mueller's going to have a field day.
And what do you think Cohen has? Have you talked to Michael Cohen?
I have not talked to him. I did try to call him, but he has an awful lot. And I think you're going to find he knows a lot about the involvement of the Russian Mafia. He certainly knows a lot about the payoffs to the women that to Stormy Daniels and I believe her name is Karen McDougal, the Playboy playmate. So he would have an awful lot of information there. And, you may remember there was a peace plan that came out. It was kind of a pathetic peace plan with the Ukraine that Michael Cohen and Felix Sater tried to ram through with Trump once Trump became president. Well, that comes right through their connections to the Russian Mafia, if you look at it. And I think that kind of material will unfold as the investigations proceed.
Yeah, I do recall that. And it's underreported, another thing that's underreported in all this.
Well, it's hard. There's so much to report.
Right. Well, how about Michael Cohen? He got all these retainers from all these big companies, and one of them was a Russian guy, too. Where did all that money go? Why is he so desperate for money now? Where did all that money go if he got all that money?
Yeah. Where did all the money go? I don't know where all the money went. I mean, Manafort says he's poor now. He's making $10 million a year.
Okay, we're out of time. Listen, Craig Unger, thank you so much. House of Trump, House of Putin, we're out of time. What do you want to leave us with?
This is a great historic event,
yes.
And it's barely started. The psychodrama of our lives is about to unfold as a great national spectacle. But you can get a preview of it in my book. Okay.
House of Trump, House of Putin, and also Active Measures. It's playing in theaters in New York and L.A., and you can catch it on Hulu. Craig Unger, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Good night.
Bye.
Okay, man. Killer stuff, huh? That was really...
Thank you. I've got another call on you, Fred.
Thank you. And now a word from our sponsors. If you find yourself in need of